Us all started if that's okay. Y'all don't need to see my Microsoft Teams. Get rid of that and start in presentation view. Okay, well, thank y'all for joining us today. It is much appreciated. We know there's certainly a lot going on in your lives. And just as a heads up, this is a public meeting, so we will adhere to the Louisiana open meeting requirements. And this is 100% observable to the public. And as you'll see on the agenda, there's an opportunity for public comments at the end of the presentation. I'm gonna let Risa have us go through this section here, and we'll go to roll call in just a minute whenever we get to the roster on the slides.
Okay, great. So this is Risa Mueller. Just a reminder that this is, of course, a public meeting. All of the items that are listed in the chat box are written public comments, whether they're internal or external from your standpoint. They are public comments and they are public meeting information. The meeting is being recorded and will be posted for public viewing. It's also being live streamed today on the Facebook page of the Watershed Initiative. Please use your video camera if you can during the meeting so we can all see each other. And if you do have technical difficulties, if you can drop that note in the chat box and let us know, that's great. And if you have technical difficulties and you're only on by phone, you can also text a message over to 225-993-1339. And a reminder that public comment portion will be later towards the end of the meeting.
Great, thank you so much, Risa. I really appreciate that. So once again, I just wanted to recognize we are, you chose to be here today. There's 59 people on this call. You all chose to be here today during the midst of a global pandemic, global civil unrest, and as well as during hurricane season in the Gulf, which I know is very stressful for a lot of us, especially with the uptick in activity that we've been seeing recently. So thank you for being here. For today, our objectives are to go through a flood risk and vulnerabilities presentation and discussion, which OCD is going to be leading. We have Pat Forbes on the line, Evelyn Campo, Gina Campo, Alex Carter, and several other people with OCD who we're going to introduce you to in just a minute. So it's objective number one. Objective number two is to do an overview of the project viewer and project inventory survey form and to take questions for that. So briefly going over the agenda, we'll go over the introductions and meeting logistics. The presentation is going to take up the bulk of today's time, so about 90 minutes or so, an hour and a half. And then we'll go into the project viewer and inventory survey tools. That'll be for about 20 minutes or so. Then we'll have our public comment period from 4:10 to 4:20 p.m. And then we'll close out at 4:20 to 4:30 p.m. So for people who are on the Regional Steering Committee, we will actually be working in the closeout section to adopt meeting minutes from the May and June meetings, as well as setting up time for our next few meetings. Okay, so we're going to do some introductions. We'll go down the list by parish in alphabetical order and then to our regional representatives just to make sure that people are on the line. So for those of you who are not on this list or are not an alternate for Regional Steering Committee, we ask that in the chat box you put your name, your organizational affiliation, if that's applicable, the parish that you live in, and then just tell us something good that you've heard in the past week. So I think something good that I've heard in the past week is that, well, today actually, is that they're anticipating that the most recent tropical development will likely go to Florida and not here. So that's just an example, but we'll go down the line here. Do we have Mike Enlow with Ascension Parish?
Hey, good afternoon. I'm here.
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Well, thank you.
Good. Glad to hear it. You got something good to tell us?
Nothing bad, but we're doing okay down here. So.
Good. Glad to hear it. Glad to have you on the line.
Thank
you. What about Tom Stevens? Thank you. We have Tom Stevens with EDR or Fred Rayford with EDR.
I'm here, Rachel.
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
No, this is Fred.
Oh, Fred, sorry. Didn't tell me which one.
I'm sorry, my apology.
No, that's okay. No need to apologize. We're not going to have, well, maybe, do we have James Stewart or Joni Stone on the phone? I know that they had a backlog at their office. They had to close their office for 10 days. So they're trying to catch up on some stuff. They said they'd be here if they could, so they might pop in later. Do we have John Clark with Iberville? Okay, I'm not hearing John. Do we have Mark Harrell with Livingston or Steve Kistler with Livingston? Okay. And I know we got Earl on the line. Earl, can you let us know you're here, just officially?
I am officially here.
Thanks, Earl. Appreciate it. What about Major Coleman with St. Helena? Or Jeremy Williams? Oh, go ahead.
I'm here. Major's here.
Hey, Major. How you doing?
Doing fine. I thought when I logged in and when I called in, it said you had me muted, and I thought you were gonna unmute me, but my phone was muted. That's why you didn't hear me first. And the good thing that happened to me is I woke up this morning.
There you go. What is it? Every day above ground's a good day, right?
Oh yes.
I love it. Thank you, Major. Ryan Donahue, we heard from you earlier. Can you let us know officially you're here?
Yes, ma'am, here.
All right. Thanks, Ryan. Do we have Devin Foyle with St. John?
Good afternoon. I'm here.
Hey, Devin. How are you?
Doing all right.
Good, good. Glad to hear it. Ross, can you let us know you're here officially? We heard from you earlier.
I am here, and the good thing that I can tell you for today is that Rachel and CRPC staff and Evelyn and OCD staff are doing a great job. So looking forward to what we have going on today.
Thanks, Ross. I appreciate that. Wouldn't be possible without you and your leadership role as chair either, or Chuck's as vice chair. All right, so we have Bridget Bailey on the line with Tangiboa. I think I saw Bridget come in, but maybe she's still on mute.
He's on by phone.
Okay, great. Great. Thanks, Bridget. What about Bobby Joe? I think I saw you come in the chat room. How you doing today, Bobby?
I'm doing
Bobby
good.
Joe.
I'm here.
Great. Glad to have you. We got Gary Migo on the line. Can you just let us know you're here officially, Gary?
Yes, I'm officially here.
Great. Thanks, Gary. And I think I saw Dietmar too. Oh, go ahead. All right. I think I saw Dietmar on the line too. Dietmar, can you let us know that you're here? And that's okay. Maybe might be having some issues unmuting. If you are Dietmar, let us know in the chat box, or you can send me a message just letting me know. Karen Zito, I think I saw you come on the line. Karen, can you let us know if you're here?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, Karen, how are you? All right, and I know we have Chuck on the line. Can you let us know that you're here officially?
I'm here, and I woke up this morning, so that was a good thing. And I saw the chipmunks in the backyard, so that was another good thing.
I can picture it now. That's really brings a lot of happy memories to me from my grandmother's backyard, actually. And then Ronnie Carter, do we have you on the line?
Yes, I'm here. And the good news is that there's no breaking bad news.
Hey, no news is good news, right?
So far, anyway.
I love it. And then I think we had John Clark join us. John, are you on the phone? You might have to unmute yourself. And for those of you who are joined by phone that are our regional steering committee members, if you're having issues with unmuting but you're on the phone, press *6 and that will unmute you. Okay. Well, I don't think I'm missing anybody, so we're going to move on from here if that's okay with everybody. Thank you to everybody who put their information in the chat box as well. We're really, really glad that you're here. So I think actually this is the moment in time whenever I pass this over to our friends over at OCD. So I'm going to stop sharing our screen, and I'm going to let Pat Forbes actually take us into this flood risk and vulnerabilities presentation.
Thanks a bunch, Evelyn. Thanks everybody for letting us come provide this presentation. We hope it's going to be interesting and helpful for everybody. Evelyn Kempo will be running the slides for us, and we got lots of smart people on here who can weigh in when I leave important things out for you guys, which I will endeavor not to do. First, I want to make sure that we sort of frame the reason for doing this. Everybody knows by now that our primary objectives are really getting science and engineering and data front and center in decision-making process relative to flood risk reduction and floodplain management. And so we want to go through a tool that we have today with you, not to make any decisions, but to introduce you to the tool to ultimately find out from you what other things the tool might do that could be more helpful to you, and then to have that tool available so that you guys can use it in your decision making processes as you proceed through work in Region 7. One thing that you'll notice is that while we have lots of science in here relative to flood risks and things like that, there are other things involved in that too, and that's natural resources that we both protect and rely on for flood risk reduction, and the human assets that every one of our communities has, and making sure that we consider those appropriately while we're talking about risk. Because the tool we want to show you today is really about getting us all on the same page about the risks that you face in Region 7 from flooding. So if by the end of the day we have a common understanding of the known flood risks in Region 7, common vocabulary around that, where the vulnerabilities are, we will have accomplished the first step in this. Certainly not the last step, but today, if we can get it kicked off and have everybody understanding the objectives, that'll be great. Next slide, please, Rachel. I'm sorry, not Rachel, Evelyn. We have 3 Campos in my office, sorry. Okay, building on previous efforts, I think making sure that we acknowledge first and foremost, we didn't just sit and come up with what we're going to show you today. This comes from experts in Region 7 around the state, but then of course each regional presentation is specific to that region. So most of the information in here has come ultimately from folks in Region 7, the experts that you already have. And so we don't want anybody who's watching this to think that it's like the Watershed Initiative folks are all of a sudden showing us something that we didn't know. Most of this comes from you. As we go through this, we got to know that there are, that we can keep these things in mind. One, we got to improve citizen understanding of flooding probability. And so what's critical there is making all of our jobs easier by making sure that the folks we're trying to help and representing understand this the way that we do. Aligning regional methods statewide. We're doing this work with each of the regions around the state. And each region is unique in many ways, not just topographically or geographically, but at the same time, there's having some alignment among them is critical if we're going to be able to speak with each other across those regional lines. achieving long-term results through a regional water management approach. I know that everybody knows this is part of what we're doing, a big part, probably the biggest part, but there are folks in general public who may not be as familiar. And so forgive us if we cover ground that many of you already know. Leaning on technical experts to develop policy guidelines. That doesn't mean handing the responsibility and the authority over to anybody, but relying on technical information and data to help guide us through policy decisions and to help guide you through policy decisions. And then using those data and science and engineering to shift the policy as it becomes available and as we all learn from it. And the most important thing here is that we are trying to make this a tool that works for you. This is yours. The story that we're trying to tell through this process is your story. We're just trying to facilitate that for you. That will always be our job. And so please keep that in mind as we go through it. Next slide, please, Evelyn. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk through the flood risk assessment for Region 7. And as we do that, this is an important time for everybody on the steering committee to please weigh in as you see things that we might be overlooking, things that we may not have in our data that would be important to add. We're going to have a couple of opportunities for a break in here. If the whole team wants to keep going, of course, we'll do that, but we'll bring up the opportunity when it gets there. Then there's a group mapping exercise that we'll do. I think we're still doing that, right, Evelyn? So yeah,
we are, yes. It's kind of woven into the slides, and then we can kind of recap at the end. That's right.
Good. So yeah, as I've said, the key here is making sure that you all look at what we're showing and just sort of fact check that for us, if you will, and help us understand if there are gaps in our understanding of it. Okay, Evelyn. So flood risk assessment. Obviously this today will be for Region 7 and it's specific to Region 7, but each watershed has unique risks, again, based on topography, geography, where people live, the vulnerability of the people who live in that region. But with that said, we still can do some things to make this as useful as possible across the state. One of those is building a common vocabulary about how we talk about flooding and flood risks. Consider the various risk factors, and I've done a few of these. Each region has its own risks, as you might well guess, depending on proximity to the coast, elevation changes in the region, that sort of thing. And we're also going to touch on working with nature, which as the further we get into this and the more flooding we suffer around the state, the clearer it becomes that that's an absolutely critical, not just critical, but necessary part of how we address our flood risks. I've already introduced Ms. Evelyn Campo, who also works with the Watershed Initiative, and she is actually running the slides for us. You all know these are the parishes in Region 7, and you also all know that while some of these parishes are included in whole within the region, many of these parishes are actually parts of 2 or 3 different regions because the boundaries of the regions are watershed based rather than jurisdictional. Okay, now we're going to look at within the region what the watersheds are. There we go. I differ somewhat with the Lake Pontchartrain southern boundary. That's the yellow line, but you can see clearly the red line is the Pearl River Basin. Orange outlines the Amite and Lake Marpaw. And the tiny little piece with the brown boundary on the Mississippi River on the left side actually flows into the Mississippi River. So essentially 4 watersheds represented within Region 7. Now what we're talking about here is hydrology, essentially. It's how water moves over, around, under, through our environment and the different pathways that it takes, and then how those affect the people living within the regions. So as we discuss hydrology, the next thing for us to discuss in this context is types of flood risk. So Region 7 experiences every single type. I will go ahead and give you that spoiler right off the bat here. We're going to talk about coastal flooding. Of course, we have regions in the state that don't experience coastal flooding, but certainly we've got coastal flooding in Region 7, river flooding in Region 7, pluvial flooding in Region 7, which I will get into detail about pluvial just shortly. And then backwater flooding, of course, and I will also talk in more detail about backwater flooding and what we mean by that. I think this is going to be a great opportunity as we talk through these different examples for you guys to weigh in with examples of your own. And most importantly, by the time we're through with this, make sure that everybody clearly understands the vocabulary we're using and that it's common for everybody. Next slide, please, Evelyn. So first, coastal flood risk. This is the one that before 2016, at least, most people in the state of Louisiana thought about. Hurricanes and tropical storms coming in, blowing a storm surge in to the lake, flooding areas around the lake. It's still a very high level risk for us. It's a big chunk of the risk associated with Region 7. The Coastal Master Plan, of course, CPRA's Coastal Master Plan is focused exclusively on coastal flooding. The next version is due in 2023. And of course, there's plenty more info on that. And I'm fairly certain we have folks from CPRA on the meeting here today. But any examples, I know Slidell, Mandeville, Madisonville have all experienced coastal flooding as a result of storms coming in and blowing water into Lake Pontchartrain, essentially. But if anybody's got other examples that we're not thinking about here, I'd love for you to share them with us if you would. I know that my brother lives in Mandeville, and they've been there for years. And they've had their yard floods at least once a year now, and that didn't happen before probably 2005 or so. It seems like a newer phenomenon, but certainly happens to them a lot now. Did you have the slider to use for this, Evelyn? Did I see that?
On this slide that we're pulling up now, we have some data from the coastal master plan, as you were mentioning, and we do have a slider that takes us between, and I'll zoom in so y'all can see it. It's going to take us between the 1% annual chance and the 0.2% annual chance event. And so that's the risk that's projected in the future for that CPRA data.
Yeah, that's a critical thing to understand about the coastal flooding and the CPRA data is that they have projections 30 years into the future based on sea level rise and other changing factors, so that rather than only having FEMA flood maps as a risk indication tool, we also have the CPRA projection maps that help you see into the future projections for that risk. And that's what these are. Everybody knows the 1% and 0.2% is what we commonly call 100-year and 500-year floods. Okay, we're going to move on to the next two types of flooding together, actually. And that's flooding from extreme rainfall, right? We've got two different kinds of flooding from extreme rainfall, fluvial and pluvial. You can see this is the August 2016 rainfall totals, and it's kind of not intuitive, but the gray and black are where the heaviest rain fell, going back to purple, red, yellow, green. In that area is 20 plus inches in the black, 15 in the gray and 10 in the light gray. So, and I don't have to tell everybody on this call that it was a devastating flood event and a massive amount of rain that most of us had never seen before. Almost every one of these areas had never seen before. So when we have heavy rain, we've got a couple of different types of flooding associated with that. First is fluvial, or what we usually call river flooding. And if we can stay on this slide for a second, sorry, can we go back just a second? The reason you can see what the geography covered by this rain map includes the watersheds of the Amite, Tchefuncte, Boga Chitto, Pearl, most importantly in this one. So the reason this is important for fluvial is that you could conceivably not even have rain in your neighborhood and still have fluvial flooding if you're close to a river or stream, because fluvial flooding, and we can go to the next slide now, thanks Evelyn, is essentially the river overflowing its banks due to rainfall in the watershed, right? So you have a rain event in a watershed, it all goes to the river. It's more than conveyance than the river has capacity, and consequently it overflows and floods. It's a very common type of flooding that we're all familiar with. Those of you on the Tangipahoa River, y'all have experienced this a great deal. Pearl, I know, generates that, Amite, of course. And it's something that we're all familiar with. The some of the dangers associated with that sometimes we don't think about here because we don't have so many, but it can cause dams and levees and dikes to break, and that can cause really catastrophic flooding beyond what simple overbank flow might do in a heavy storm. The other kind of flooding, next slide please, Evelyn. The other kind of flooding that we have associated with extreme rainfall is what we're calling pluvial flooding, which is, we usually associate it with sort of urban and suburban overloading of a local drainage system. It's not so much rain falling upstream and then overflowing the river as it is rain falling exactly where you are and overwhelming the drainage system where you are. Have some examples here, one in Baker and Zachary. Oh, sorry, you were on the first one there. And you can see here in each of these, there is a lot of flooding. Each of those dots is an individual assistance claim from 2016. And that's FEMA individual assistance. That means they got flood damage that was confirmed by FEMA. And the reason we've got this up for this to demonstrate the pluvial flooding is because you can see a lot of these places are away from necessarily big channels. You don't have to be sitting right next to a creek or a river to flood in an extreme rain event. We could look at that Baker Zachary, please. I think there's even more. The other critical thing to notice about this, and I think we talk about this a little later on, but I'm going to bring it up now too, is you can see if I'm, yeah, that is the 500-year floodplain, isn't it? The light blue, Evelyn?
That's the 100-year, the special flood hazard area for the 100-year flood.
What I meant. You can see how many of these flooded properties are not even in the floodplain. And in fact, in our homeowner repair program, a good 80% of the folks we helped didn't have flood insurance. 50% of the folks we helped were not in 100-year floodplains. So you can see those 100-year floodplains are usually going to be drawn around the water conveyances. But in this case, we had flooding way outside those boundaries. And a lot of that is pluvial.
This is Chuck. Just,
yep.
I could confirm just from my daily commute into work that there are spots between Baker and Zachary where the land is flat and you have that sort of what I guess is the pluvial flooding. It's not near any major conveyance, but the land is flat and it has nowhere to go. It just ponds up in people's yards.
Yep, that's a perfect example. Thanks, Chuck. And that can get bigger in scale, and it can actually flood people's homes, even without, like you said, being next to a stream. The third kind of flooding that we want to talk about is backwater flood events. Unless there are any other questions or comments, other examples. Oh, that's right.
You know, I want to, oh, go ahead. I just want to encourage everyone, as you can see on this prior slide, this is information that we can, you know, move around. You can interact with this mapping tool. And so if we're looking at an area and you want to say, hey, go to my community, I want to show you some information, we will move it to that area. So, you know, jump in and tell us where we need to go.
Like right now.
And we have some snippets too of some news articles, because we know specifically in this region, you know, we've had some recent events that were really, you know, extreme and alarming.
Hey, Pat, this is Mike Enlow from Ascension Parish. Can you guys zoom in on the Prairieville area and southeast Baton Rouge, Livingston?
Sorry, Mike.
I didn't
your
quite hear
audio
that.
is not good.
I think Mike asked, you asked if you could zoom in on the Ascension, maybe East Baton Rouge area. Is that right, Mike?
The Prairieville zone, I believe.
Yeah, Prairieville
Great.
zone. Anything in Ascension. If you need somewhere to go look at, we'd love to see it.
Absolutely. I'm going there now. It just has to load up a little bit. Now, keep in mind, y'all, too, this isn't your only chance to jump in. If you want to think about it more and then tell us where to go, you can do that, too. We have a couple slides like this where we can kind of zoom in and talk about the specific, you know, areas that you're seeing maybe changing risk or something shifting about the landscape and you're flooding more. So go right ahead.
And I know y'all have gotten a lot of rainfall in your area, Mike, so if you have any specific examples you want to speak to, I think that a lot of people would relate to that, and I think we would also see, you know, maybe some of the differences and the challenges that you're seeing. I do see a question in the chat box that I want to get to if Mike wants to respond.
No, that's fine. I just didn't know if you guys were just kind of zooming in to look at some specific stuff. But yeah, we've had a few rain events that your last few weeks, and Ron Savoy is on as well. But you guys were asking to look at some stuff. I just figured it'd be a good chance to maybe look at where, you know, there can be some Region 7 cooperation. At, you know, southeast Baton Rouge, Livingston, North Ascension seems to be an area that is hit pretty hard by backwater flooding. So that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Really appreciate that insight and that local knowledge and expertise, and you flagging that there's the opportunity for Region 7 cooperation, in particular with backwater flooding, because it's impacting all those areas that you just mentioned. There are a couple of,
I was going to say,
sorry, Pat?
We've got a question, Evelyn. Will the map be public? Is it yet? Can one download the layers? And I think the answer to all those things is yes. The tool is for you to use. Can we tell them how to do that, Evelyn?
That's right. Yeah, that's a good question. So what we like to do is post a link on the LWI website so that everyone can get into this tool and, you know, move it around. What's that?
Can you hear me now? Can you guys hear me now?
We can hear you, Dietmar.
Okay,
Yep.
go ahead, finish up. I want to make one comment, but I think I have problems with my computer or whatever. Go ahead, guys.
Thanks, Dietmar.
So you were talking. I had problems. I don't know. I kept saying something, but you guys were not listening. No, I want to wait. I have many comments, but one in particular, because we kept making reference to the 1% probability flood, the what so-called 100-year flood. And that is basically the FEMA maps we're talking about. I just want to make a comment that those are very inadequate maps. I believe a lot of the technology that is evolving right now are going to make those maps completely you know, not good, because it's impossible to draw such a fine line when you use these probabilities. So when we make reference to that 100 year, 500 year, and all of that, I believe that in the near future that's going to change dramatically. With information.
We're actually going to address that in just a few slides, Dietmar.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
No. Thank you. It's a great point.
All right. I was muted here for some reason. Nobody could hear me. I don't know what was happening.
You might have been muted, and I apologize for that, Dietmar.
Yeah.
And we did have a couple of other questions. Oh, go ahead, Fred. We'll make sure we get these questions too.
You're asking me?
Oh, I thought you were about to talk, and I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead if you're ready.
I was just listening to Dietmar, and I was thinking, I said, that 100-year rain event happens about every 10 days, seems like, you know, so.
You know, that's a good point. You know, I mean, one thing that I find myself aware of in working in this region in particular is like all of us on this call have lived through now a couple like really serious flooding events that are, you know, statistically not supposed to happen frequently, yet we have been through many of them.
Well, I think everybody needs to realize is that the design storm is, the name is kind of misleading because it changes as you get more data. So the design storms, the 100-year, 500-year is always changing.
Yep.
Because we don't have enough history. That's the reason why. It's all based on probabilities. That's the reason why. And
yeah, and as you get more history, the numbers need to be updated.
That's correct.
And so do the maps.
That's correct.
We also have a comment about the differential effects of impervious pavement and channelized streams versus natural streams and sort of the impacts of development, all of which we know are also impacting the flood levels that we're experiencing from rainstorms that might be the same rainstorm as we had 10 years ago, and the effects could be much worse now because of the effects of development and how we manage that. That also can have impacts, since we're still on the pluvial flooding slide, specifically on that pluvial flooding as well as fluvial.
That is correct, and you can add to that changes in land use and deforestation also affects that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And y'all want to make sure we're not forgetting Ryan or Nora's question. So Ryan's question, is there a way to determine which homes flooded during a storm surge event versus those that flooded during rain events? So that's Ryan's question.
I guess on some level, we know the answer to that based on a specific disaster, because frankly, our funding at OCD is based on specific disasters. So people who we helped in 2005 were almost exclusively from storm surge. And people that we helped in 2016 were either pluvial, fluvial, or backwater. There's no storm surge associated with the 2016 floods because it was really just a rain-driven event. But whether the National Flood Insurance Program tracks them that way, I do not know, or anybody else for that matter.
Yeah. You know, again, comment because I have been around this thing for so long. You take the Midway Basin that I am in, and we'll see the floodings that have happened. The intensity has increased. But there's one element that is very significant, and that is the incidence of rain. Where is the incidence of rain occurring? If it goes 25 miles on one side versus 25 miles on the other side of the Emit, that makes a tremendous difference where it does damage. Population densities that was said just now, and all of these things. It goes out on the other side, there was a Baton Rouge side, more here. So, I'll give you an example. 1983, which was our record until 2016, and everybody was talking about the 83 flood. The incidence of rain was in the Zachary area, 13 inches. 2016, and this is only I'm saying this for thinking purposes. In 2016, the incident was in Watson, Livingston Parish, next to the Mid River, 31 inches. The digits flipped. That's the difference in the flooding that happened in 83 versus what happened in 2016, for example. It gives you an example. I only bring in this because we in the Midway Basin have studied this tremendously. And I want to say something at the end about risk. We have some documents that we have prepared and studies on risk. I would be more than glad with everybody. But that is another part of this whole puzzle, how to develop scenarios of incidents of rain based on the historical data. Because the flooding, a 30-inch rain in, for example, in our case, in Zachary, causes a different dynamics of flooding than these 30 inches of rain, let's say, in the Livingston Parish area, Watson or thereabouts, where you want to put it. It makes a difference. So if there's ever a time where we could develop, some people tell me we have to develop 1,000 scenarios. No, I'm not talking about that. But if you take a basin and use a quadrangle, I mean, divide it up in 3 or 4 quadrangles of incidents of rain and run once we agree on a model that we are very confident in and run it under those scenarios, that gives you basically a book cook, if you want to call it, of what happens when the incidents of rain occurs in different parts. And as these events occur, the emergency preparedness people will say, oh, look, this is developing into scenario B, or scenario A, or scenario C. That will help tremendously the local community for preparation and everything else, in addition to the overall planning, development, and everything else that will take place, especially in the urbanized areas and things of that nature. I just wanted to bring up something. You know, I know we're talking about on a different level here right now, but I want to bring some food for thinking, so to speak, about, you know, some things that are not mentioned very much or very often.
Well, I think it's quite clear to many people, Dietmar, to your point, that if anything, with global climate change, the storm events are going to get more frequent and more intense. And so you're right. We can't rely on old science, on old maps, especially when we layer in on top of that development patterns and hard surface addition that weren't existing before, and deforestation that reduces the absorptive capacity of the land, so to the point that you're exactly right. We have future scenarios that we can't be exactly sure they're right, and that probably compels us to take a more conservative approach to understanding the possible worst cases. We are doing some work. We will be doing some work over time that will be of use and available to every region related to updating the rainfall predictive maps for the state. But at this point, we don't have newer rainfall scenarios to go to. Any other questions, comments?
Pat, I would only say that from my perspective in Baton Rouge, our biggest challenge is a lot of these areas that we're having these type of flash flood events were built 65, 70 years ago, and the design standards at that time are nothing what they probably should need to be today. And when you don't have hardly any property at all to do any type of retention, or even with pervious pavement, you're still going to fight those battles when you deal with these type of rain events that we're dealing with.
Yep.
That's, to me, is going to be a big challenge, especially in the inner cities that have older infrastructure that were not designed, well, they were designed at the right standards for that period of time, but today is it's a challenge.
Yep, you're right. I think it's going to take a lot of innovation on all of our parts to start to try to figure out how do we address that with the constraints on space that we have. Anything else? Okay, Evelyn, if we can. Oh yeah, these were some examples of some recent flooding since 2016. That's good. I think we've talked through that though. Thank you. Last type that we've essentially added on is backwater flooding. And I saw a comment in one of the comments earlier about this, which is essentially when you get storm surge, I saw that they said it could go all the way up to Covington. And essentially backwater flooding is just that. It's when the receiving, there's a restriction either due to elevation or something else at the receiving body of the stream, and you get flow of flood in ways that you would not normally expect, like going backwards, because there's just nowhere for the water to go. And we've had just about every region in the state has described for us some level of backwater flooding that they've experienced in the last 10 or 15 years. Okay, I think that we're ready to move on to the traditional. I guess at this point, I'm sorry, before we do, if anybody wants to share some other examples of backwater flooding in Region 7. I think clearly when lakes Pontchartrain and Maurepas get high and there's nowhere for the Tickfall River or the Tangipahoa River to go, the Amite River, you can create backwater flooding. How will the modeling be conducted in areas of ephemeral streams? Well, certainly they're part of the conveyance system, but not normally wet, right? The modeling will take that into effect. Oh, good point. Bayou Manchac gets backwater flooding from the Amite.
Hey, Pat, this is John Clark with Iberville Parish.
Yep.
I got a comment about backwater flooding.
Please.
I'd like to echo what you just said about Bayou Manchac. Every time, you know, the water comes from Amite River and points far north, and like you say, it stacks up, then it backs up into Bayou Manchac, and that keeps on coming upstream to St. Gabriel and all of East Iberville, and that's a big challenge for us. And as our local water is trying to get out, well, it can't get out because it's stacked up. And we're wondering, you know, this Bayou Manchac is a state waterway. We really, even though we might have the horsepower to do something about it, we can't because it's not our jurisdiction to go in and clean it out. So we're kind of dependent on the state to maintain the Bayou Manchac. That's our outfall. And then that goes to the Amite River. Amite River, I don't know what's been done to it lately. I mean, it seems to me like it's filling in. Then the Amite River flows to Lake Maurepas. Lake Maurepas, I mean, I go boating out there. It seems like it's 3 to 4 to 6 feet deep in some places. So it's kind of like a speed bump. And we can do all these local projects to get the water off of our local areas, but eventually it has to have somewhere to go. And where it goes to is these state waterways that hasn't been maintained in I don't know how long. They stopped the dredging in Lake Maurepas, the shale dredging. There's no dredging in the Amite River, and I don't know, you know, dealing with the same plumbing that we've had for the last 50, 60 years. So I don't know what the answer is there.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I really appreciate your comments, because that is the whole point of what we're doing here, is rather than each of us figuring out in our own jurisdiction or our own neighborhood what's the appropriate thing to do to help that local space, we're more appropriately now all together looking at how do we do this in a way that benefits everybody, and in a whole, looking at the whole system as we make decisions about what's going to provide us the greatest reduction of flood risk going forward. So, I mean, that is exactly the point, John. Thank you for that.
we need to look at these issues, Dietmar, again. I'm very bad at getting myself into trouble. We need to think, we need to change our way of thinking. That when you said one jurisdiction versus the other, we have evolved into a system where one jurisdiction fights the other. And so we have to, that's the purpose, I think, like with the Immediate Basin Commission, and then now with the super region you guys got to create, we have to stand above that and look from a holistic point of view of how can we resolve that problem. And so, and that usually requires funding, not funding from Baton Rouge or with the interest of Baton Rouge or Ascension or Iberville Parish, but there has to be looked at it as a whole of what can be done, because Baton Rouge discharges into the Manchac, into the Amite. I mean, that we cannot change that. Mother Nature told us that. But then we need to try to think, I'm very familiar with the Manchac issue. Some of you know that. And so of how can we resolve that? And it's not easy, but it is solvable. It can be solved. And that is a different level. This is not like Clark talking a while ago. I think it was Clark. Cannot be done by these individuals, no matter how much money they got, because of that interjurisdictional problem. And that brings me one more question that has not been mentioned. In all of those rivers, when you're talking about river flooding, etc., nobody maintains waterways. Amite is the classical example, and Commit is a classical example that if we want to allow for development to keep occurring, we need to also have agencies responsible that the drainage system works. I'm not saying dredging crazy, because I know that will not work. It has to be very carefully done. But that is not, there is no statutes, there is no law, there is no funding for nothing like that. So part of this whole equation of things, again, maintenance needs to be somewhere included in the assessment of all of these things. The improvements, not only allow certain development or no development and things of that nature, but also that the pipeline system, I call it, is really working. Mother Nature will never stay the same. That is the reason why you see meanders. And I know I'm talking to the choir. And it will constantly be changing, no matter what we do. But in order for us to live and minimize some of these problems, we need to figure out a way of maintaining these channels without causing environmental problems.
So kind of tying into what was said there, that if these channels are filling in, we need to look at why are they filling in? If something being done to cause or promote that. And I think all of the things that have been mentioned really lead to tell us why now we need to look at some new solutions to some old but continuing and increasing problems.
Yep. That's right. We're not going to be able to rely on the things that we have thought worked in the past. We're demonstrating on an annual basis that we can't keep going with the status quo. Speaking of not continuing with the status quo, we're going to move on to the next slide, which is about traditional gaps in understanding our flood risk. And this goes to some comments that were made earlier. The thing that most of us are familiar with is FEMA's special flood hazard areas. And that's again, the 1% recurrence and 0.2% recurrence flood areas. In these maps you're looking at, you can see the A zones are those light blue areas. The V zones is the darker blue. Interestingly here, it's important to note that 44% of Region 7 is actually in a special flood hazard area. So that's a pretty clear indicator that we're going to have to be thinking through not just floodplain management, but development and that sort of thing. And how do we go about doing that, and where? As you look at this whole region, you can see we've got a lot of land that's in floodplains. Now, I don't want to, I'm not trying to bash FEMA here. They're actually partners of ours in this effort. They understand these shortcomings, but we all know that FEMA struggles with keeping their firms up to date. Not the least of which reason is because they don't always get the funding that they need to get the 5-year updates on flood maps. The other thing that's worth mentioning is that the 100-year flood maps, the purpose of those is really around banking, land development. It's a way to look at risk, but it's not the only way. There is a line drawn, as you all know, within which you have to have flood insurance if you want to buy a house, and outside of which you don't have to buy flood insurance. And we all know, especially after looking at the map a little earlier with all those flooded homes that were outside the floodplain in 2016, that the definition of what's going to flood and what isn't going to flood is not that clear cut. And so consequently, the assessment of risk and the understanding of risk can't be that simple either, which is really why we're progressing this tool to get out to you guys so that you can use it and have another tool in your toolbox as you in your region think through the flood risks that you face. Mandy, were you going to say something? No? Okay. Any questions about the flood zones here?
We have a little, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
We have some buttons that kind of zoom us in a little bit, just to kind of show the overlay over that aerial photograph. We have the A zones and Z zones kind of pulled out here.
You know, we don't really talk about this. Everybody understands, I think, what V zones are, and those are usually coastal areas where the flooding might be accompanied with wave action, and the restrictions are greater, the insurance is more expensive, and all that. There are somewhat similar type areas around streams that are not coastal, called floodways, in which there is expected during a flood period to have actual flow across the property. And it's sort of similar to V zones in that we can't invest federal funds in rebuilding structures in those floodways.
That's basically what it is. It's just where the water flows. And beyond that is what's called still water. Backwater, they call it, but there is no flow. The water just slowly coming and creeping up, so to speak. That's really what it is, the floodway. I give you one more number on, particularly on what you're talking about, Pat, on the lower part of this of the super region, which is the Pontchartrain and Manchac. We did a study 8-9 years ago with Dr. Su, I think out of LSU. At that time, I asked him if there's any way that he could figure out the wind impact basically it's hurricane, but in our case we said wind impact on the lower basin of the Emit, primarily the French settlement area, all of that area over there. And he did a study, and he came to and I have the study, it's a very little study, I'm glad to send it, it's very old, but still it gives you an idea. And one of the results that he came up with is that a persistent wind of 30 miles an hour, now I'm talking about a hurricane, 30 miles per hour, a southeast wind 30 miles per hour hitting the mouth of the Emit River rises the water by 5 feet. 30 miles.
Wow. Yeah.
That gives you just an idea. So when you have the riverine coming down, it cannot be even a small flood, it hits what I call a water dam. If the two coincide, you will have a water dam down there. And so it's a seesaw down there. Depending if there's a hurricane coming or not coming, if it is a southeast, the old farmers down there used to tell me, Mr. Dietmar, you know, whenever the southeast wind comes around, I take my cows out, I bring it to high ground. And so those guys know it by instinct. And so I just bring this number up for, again, to think about, you know, what is the impact, the wind impact, hurricane impact on this lower basin, which the dynamics is completely different than the riverine. But when the two coincide, is the worst scenario you can imagine. So I'm just giving you a little bit of, I mean, I would be glad to share this information with anybody, the whole group, if they want to. I know it's old, but it's food for thinking about this. It requires different strategy to resolve the problem, so to speak.
So one thing I'd thank you, Dietmar. One thing I'd like to bring up about that is that part of the, I think everybody knows that we are, we've already done the H&H modeling for the Amite River Basin. Over the next 18 months to 2 years, we're going to be modeling the entirety of the state, but included in that modeling effort is a development of a model for the transition zone between coastal and fluvial flooding. So it essentially to address exactly what you're talking about, how do we take into account when there is storm surge, the effect of that storm surge on the riverine flooding. And so at the end of this process, we're going to have, if not integrated model at the transition zone, at least models that can talk to each other and help us better understand the impacts of those pieces.
And I think, thank you, Pat. I just wanted to add something on there too, because Dietmar, I think one aspect I was hearing you maybe talk about a little bit was also a reference to sunny day flooding or high tide flooding or king tide flooding. I think there's a lot of different names for it. But I think I just wanted to recognize that that is an additional type of flooding that our region does see often. I think especially down in that Manchac area, like our folks in San Jacinto, St. Tammany, across the North Shore, I think are very familiar with that. St. John, St. James, really like that entire Pontchartrain, Maurepas Basin spread. In terms of the modeling, I think, you know, that requires a very finite scale of modeling to be able to model that high tide or sunny day flooding, as you would call it, because it's that smaller probability or a larger probability event, if you will. It's more frequently happening. So I would be curious to know if that's going to be a part of the models, but I think they're meant to be something that's broader. We also have a question here from Thomas Doucet, Dr. Thomas Doucet, that I think just went to me. So I'll say it out loud if that's okay. What are the components and elements of the H&H models you're creating, and what is their resolution?
I'm not the right person to answer that. I don't know if we have Ian or anybody from DOTD on the call, but we can get the information.
I can try to comment on some of that. being a part of the data and modeling tag, is that the primary model they're looking at using for these upland streams is the HEC-RAS model. And it has several, a suite of several products that can be used along with that. And they're also looking at, because flooding is different in the coastal area, they're looking at using a model called SURGE, I believe it is, because you've got two completely different actions here that that require a different type of model, but do know that it has been discussed to look at combining those two models or ways of doing that. There are people that are looking at that, whether it's inside of the Watershed Initiative or outside of it. It is something that's being discussed and looked at. The models, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. The models as well, understand, is these base models that are being developed are not intended to provide the answer. They're intended to give us a starting point from which they can be taken and go ahead and enhanced to answer specific questions.
Yep. Thank you. And with respect to resolution, Rachel, I think it's going to be different across the watershed depending on the risks that are identified, the level of risk.
My gut feel is that the models are not going to be able to tell what some people think it is. What can be done is impossible. Like the gentleman was hinting right before now, is these models are going to give us both the search models, which, yeah, they're completely different way of calculating that than you do a riverine, will give us enough information that intelligent people would be able to use to formulate the policies, the delineations, the risk. Delineation is going to be out in this field. It's going to be all risk defined, in my opinion. Even FEMA is going to end up with risk and not lines. So these models, as they get better and better and better, they're going to be basically a guide that will help the decision maker. That means including the politicians, the local officials, and everybody else, to formulate the proper standards, procedures, and everything. But again, I want to emphasize at the end, risk is going to be the catchphrase in the future.
And Pat's correct.
We're way behind right now, the 8 ball, so to speak, but it's moving in that direction.
Pat's correct in that if you have an area that's highly populated, it would probably have a higher resolution than an area that is, not so populated and doesn't have as high of risk. And these models will be living models, continually updated.
That's correct.
Also, some great comments and questions around essentially development. If we understand the impacts of development, wouldn't it make sense for us to change that? I think that certainly falls into the category of we're going to have to start looking for different answers to the problems that we have had in the past, because the answers we've had so far have not necessarily gotten us where we need to go. And then another comment that St. Tammany still uses 1989 firm maps. And yeah, it's just that is really the modeling that we're going to do will hopefully provide another tool for everybody to understand risk in a different way. And with all those tools, be able to make the best decisions relative to projects, relative to development codes, the whole shebang. Okay. I'm sorry.
Real quick, I saw something else in the chat that I thought was a really great point. I saw that Melissa pointed out even people who live outside the flood zone should buy flood insurance. That is 100% correct. You can tell that even if you're in between areas that are in the flood zone, you're still like pretty close to the edge of that flood zone, and it doesn't mean you're never going to flood. And so it is really good advice to purchase flood insurance no matter where you are, and especially if you live in Louisiana. So thank you, Melissa. I think
And
that's
it's
a great
cheap.
point.
It's cheap.
Right,
if you don't live in the
exactly.
flood zone. I bought my flood insurance on August the 12th, 2016, and I'm about a mile from a 100-year flood zone, but I sleep better at night with it, and it's less than $500 a year.
Right. If you're considered low risk, which I know, things change in a second, you can still flood if you're considered low risk, but you can get that lower premium rate potentially. And one other thing I heard, I think from Dietmar, that I want to make sure that we kind of agree on is, you're right, Dietmar, we're showing FEMA data here, and like Pat pointed out, there are limitations to that because it's kind of like backward looking data, right? It's based on past events and the data that we have on hand. It doesn't necessarily tell you what's going to happen in the future, and things can change in the landscape and in development patterns and frequency of rainfall. And so you're right that, I think that's what Pat is driving at, that, you want the best data you can get. And sometimes when we're relying on old data, there's room for improvement.
I think we had a really very good, interesting discussion, Pat. I like it.
All right, thank you.
And else I'll throw out there just to think about is that I used to live down along Brightside Lane, and the property there was about a mile from the Mississippi River. And when the Mississippi River is high, some of the yards used to have standing water in them, and that is connection to groundwater due to the influence from the Mississippi River and some of these larger rivers. So that's just possibly something else to keep in mind in some of these areas.
Yep, good point.
That is the problem in Manchac that we talked about a while ago, the same problem. Yeah.
All right, thank y'all. If we're ready to move on, Evelyn, please. Okay, next thing we're going to talk about is repetitive and severe loss data. Again, this is tied to firms in that it is associated with flood insurance data. So we don't want to confuse this with the data points we were looking at earlier that were the FEMA individual assistance claims in 2016. This is reflective of flood insurance claims that have been made against the National Flood Insurance Program. And you can see the darker the color on this one, the denser the number of claims and repetitive loss properties and severe repetitive loss properties in that census tract. I think those are census tracts, aren't they?
I believe these are grouped per census block. You can see on the legend, it's kind of showing you density per census block. And of course, some census blocks are a little bit more densely packed, and so you'll see they show up a little bit smaller. And then the more of the dark purple color you see, that represents higher density of those rep loss properties.
Yep.
You say the darker is higher density? Are you saying the darker purple is higher density?
The darker purple is a higher density of flood insurance claims.
Oh, I thought population. The reason census tracts are so small in the Baton Rouge area, as the population grows, the Census Bureau, you got more and more people per square mile. So they make the census tract smaller and smaller over time. And they tend to be very large in the urban area, in the rural area, so to speak.
Well, these represent repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. I know we've got some floodplain managers in this group. If anybody wants to weigh in on RL and SRL and how you're dealing with those and what they mean in your local community. Well, if not, we will move on to looking at the March and August 2016 floods. And again, what we're showing here are FEMA individual assistance data. Each one of those dots represents an IA claim that was made in the 2016 August floods. Many of those places also flooded in March of 2016, but this just represents August, I'm pretty sure. And I think if you can't you zoom in? Thank you, Evelyn. And here we're looking, I think, at Prairieville area. Again,
That's right.
Again, you can see the flood zones in the light blue, the 100-year flood zone. And then all the minor, major, and severe flooded homes is confirmed by FEMA in 2016, August. And again, just it becomes quite clear how many people flooded who were not in that 100-year floodplain, going back to the comments earlier about buying insurance, whether the bank requires it or not. And the yellow dots are minor damage, but just make sure you understand, minor damage means less than a foot of water. Anybody who's ever had flooding in their home knows that 3 inches of water in your home there's nothing minor about it.
The incident of loss, from I recollect in my old times, the incident, what Pat is saying is something that not many people think about. The incident of loss happens in the first foot of water. So to speak, couple of feet above is the incident of the cost. Once you start getting above that, still increases the cost, but it gets to be less and less, so to speak, in terms of the amount. But yes, the incidence is in the first 2 feet, I remember, or something to that effect.
Okay, and I think you were going to click on that, zoom in on Central Denham Springs, Evelyn.
Yeah, y'all can see that takes us to this area. I'm going to back out a little bit just so you can kind of get your bearings here.
Mm-hmm. Again, you can even see some red dots on some areas that are not in the 100-year floodplain here.
Yeah, it's very interesting to look at that picture.
If y'all would, look at the numbers on the left side of that slide. 86,000 homes in Region 7 were impacted in March and August. And 44% of those were outside of the special flood hazard area. Okay. Let's see. So we're going to move on now. But you've seen that tool, and everybody can go use that. Start to zero in. You will notice when you zoom very close in, the distinct spots will disappear. There's a privacy issue there, and so you can't zoom in close enough so that you can see like where the address is, but you can see neighborhoods and areas and in a way that helps you better understand the risk. The next piece of this is working with nature, and this goes to some of the comments we've had earlier about having to take a different approach to how we manage this, at least looking at different tools that we can use that we might not have used before, might not have considered as part of the toolbox before. And that's natural storage of water, wetland functions. We have plenty of those types of assets in Region 7, of course, but figuring out ways that we can use the natural functions of not only the streams, but the wetlands, the forests, even the agricultural areas. What are some different things that we have not thought about before that would help us improve our flood management and also improve the value of those natural features in the landscape? I mean, this is the sportsman's paradise, of course, and our rivers and streams and wetlands and woods mean a lot to us. And are there ways that we can think about that both use those assets to help us manage flood risk, as well as enhance the value of those features to all of us as we go through the process? So it's just kind of a shift in thought about both approach and values in terms of what those features mean to us and what their value could be to us. Are there, as we look at this, you can see there are plenty of assets there in the way of wetlands. Are there places that you can think of specifically that might be helpful or useful in Region 7's flood risk management? And obviously we don't have to discuss that answer today. If anybody has specifics that they'd like to bring up, by all means, please do it. But more importantly, use this tool, this map, this information as you, as a steering committee, are thinking through the options that you have to identify ways and features that might be helpful.
Can I bring up one?
Sure.
On the Emit River, this is not new, and I know you guys are not aware of it. Fred knows about it if he's still on the phone. And we have been thinking about that, and that is not in contradiction to the Darlington Reservoir, Pat, that you are very familiar, that, you know, is being studied right now by the Army Corps of Engineers. But about 15 years ago, an engineer, Mitt Trailer, rest in peace, he died several years ago. He and the hydrologist of the Army Corps of Engineers put this little study proposal together to do some retention along the Emit, basically what we call dry dams or dry lakes that will hold water temporarily and release it at a given rate. And when the storm is over, it keeps going downstream, so to speak. The area of interest is an area in the middle Emit River midsection of the Amite River, nor in the Watson area, where for the last 50 years or better has been used for surface mining, sand and gravel, primarily gravel. When you look at an aerial photo of that section, and I have those, you will see it looks like a moonscape basically over the years. Historically, state Louisiana has been very, very kind of relaxed on that, on surface mining. And so utilize those areas which are really environmentally very damaged in a set of, it's really based on the concept of 3 small impact dams in that section, that each one will hold a certain amount of water, so to speak. It's not be able to resolve the 100-year, so-called 100-year flood or anything like that, but it will hold a substantial amount of water when the floods are coming. They are staggered one after the other, with a spillway on the side. And so they will do a temporal retention until the rain and the flood passes. It will, once it discharges, basically it will be again dry, except for the river will be flowing. And then combine that, first of all, improve the area so it can be used as open space during non-flooding. So you can put parks, everything to do with outdoor activities. We could use the dams in terms of access east and west, which would be excellent during flooding events. So that is a concept. By the way, my commission, they asked me about it recently. I think it's a good idea if we can get the interest of this region, this community all together, so to speak. And that falls right into the concept, I think, that Pat is talking about. Because instead of having these abandoned sand and gravel pits all over the place, you will have a nice green area that can be used by the people for passive recreation or whatever we want to use it for. Open space is called sometimes. And again, during a flood, it will, and it has been used in Houston, it will act as a temporal retention of a certain amount of water. Combined with other policies and strategies and everything else, it will probably have a good, fairly good benefit for the Baton Rouge metro area, Denham Springs in particular, and the eastern part of East Baton Rouge Parish. I would be glad to send that to you, Pat, if you are interested, halfway interested.
I actually have it, Dietmar. Somebody shared that with me. Mr. Savoy shared that with us.
Oh, yeah. So, potentially, yeah.
Yep. Well, thank you, though, for that. I think it's a really interesting idea, and it's a great example of trying to reconnect the conveyances with their floodplains in a way that slows and holds water. And I think that it'll, I mean, that's certainly something for Region 7 folks to consider.
All the other rivers might have a similar scenario. I don't know, like in Santamani and places like that. I have no idea, but that is something to, I don't know if they're, if that is something to contemplate, I don't know.
Yep. I know I grew up on Tangipahoa River, and it certainly has plenty of sand and gravel pits. Right. Hey, we're going to move.
What were you saying, Chuck?
This is Chuck.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit, and that's definitely an idea of thinking of new solutions. There is some considerations with it in that those ponds aren't normally dry. They have water in them continually, and there's a question of how much storage you would actually gain. And then when high water flows breach those levees, there are some concerns with sediment and sand being introduced into the water column. But with that in mind, we reviewed, provided comments to the Corps of Engineers projects on both the Amite River with the dry dam at Darlington and with what the version that preceded that. And because of that, we got them to look at using some of those abandoned sand and gravel mines to restore the meanders up there. So at least we got them to look at it, you know, so which is something new. And there is, I think it maybe didn't give them the capacity that they needed. I'm not sure, but at least they looked at it. They looked at nature-based solutions.
You said something very, very interesting that spiked my mind. Those of you that don't know me, I'm an old man. That's the reason I have so much knowledge of this area. When you said the meanders, as a consequence, as another story that was done, as a consequence of the sand and gravel operation, the Middle and Mid Basin, the river itself between the state line and Denham Springs has shortened itself by 6 miles because the original meanders disappeared with the sand and gravel operation. So you have increased the gradient, Pat. You increase the gradient. The old timers used to tell me 2 things. Number 1, the crossing of the Emit at the Florida Boulevard was armored. You couldn't walk across it. You had to swim. When they were young men, young kids, they had to swim across. It's completely silted up. And then from there down all the way to French settlement beyond to Manchac. And the other aspect, the gradient change, the meanders disappeared. And so, and that also increased the timing of the crest, the flooding crest. Traditionally, if you look at USGS data, you will see that you go back and look at the time it took a flooding crest to go from the state line to Denham Springs and what it takes today. It used to take in the old times, if I recall correctly, about 24 hours, 36 hours. Now, 24. What is that telling you?
Yep, that's interesting.
The water is flowing faster, right? It's logical. You don't have to be a scientist. You know, meanders are breaks. It slows the water down. So
it reduces the energy, actually.
Exactly right. So when you do this type, when you start disturbing that through surface mining and stuff like that, and please don't get me the wrong way. I'm pointing finger, nobody. We all are guilty, whatever, you know. That, of course, the river always looks a way to move the water the most efficient way it can. And so you combine that, you combine with the rainfall, you take all of those factors and you add them together, and then that explains a lot of what really is happening, or is happening to us lately in the last 20 years or whatever you want to go back to. You know, climate change that is really global in nature, but this is very local. This is a very local issue, very local on the Emit River. I just bring it to your attention.
Yep, thank you.
Sit down and talk about this. I can talk for hours on this.
Not today, though.
No.
Hey, I'm going to, there's another comment that everybody should read about ponds are just part of the story. I think everybody knows that. And it is just an example, really, to make sure that we are considering other things that we may not have considered before. And one of those might be filling in floodplains. That is certainly a thing that we have not tried to restrict in the past that is absolutely having an impact on our conveyance capacity, our storage capacity, and consequently our flood risks. If I could, though, now we're going to move on to the last data set we have, and this, because this is super important and we are getting a little short on time for our section. We have so far talked about flood risk in the context of places and geographies, where it floods, where it doesn't. The other critical part of that is who lives in the places where it floods, because that's actually who we're trying to protect when we think about this, right? Is people, the structures that people live in, but the people who live in those structures. And so one interesting data set to use to give us some context for that is the CDC's Social Vulnerability Index. It gives us a little bit more granular information about the socioeconomic status, household composition, disabilities, minority status and language, housing and transportation, how resilient by virtue of those things are the folks who live in these regions that are most at risk of flooding. So again, it is easy for us to sort of focus on the geography and engineering, but if we're not looking at the people who live where we're trying to prevent flooding, then we're not really looking at all the data that are important, right? So we're going to go to the next slide, and this is another piece of this tool. Evelyn is going to be able to show you sort of the overlay between flooded areas by virtue of the FEMA individual assistance data and social vulnerability index. So you can see on the right side, as she slides to the left, she's overlaying the social vulnerability. There we go.
And so everybody knows, and Rachel, thank you for putting the link in the chat. Even though we are running short on time today, we want to continue to collect everybody's input until August 18th. And so, you know, if you have time on your own and you want to go into this map and use this tool, you're going to click the button here. It'll take you to the same screen you're seeing now. And then we have some preloaded locations. You see in the numbers light up with a name as I scroll through. So you can go to your area or go to an area close to where you want to be, right? And then you can see close up, you can see your aerial, flood zones, your IA points, and then pull this over, right? And that will give you your social vulnerability. So if you generate some input for us or some comments, or, you know, if we left something out, if there's something that we need to talk about as a group within Region 7, maybe in a following meeting, you know, we do want to make sure that we get that from you. And so I would go ahead and, you know, send an email to Rachel and let her know if you have some input. If we get emails to our inbox at the Watershed Initiative, we'll also make sure that those get routed to Rachel, and that we collect everybody's feedback, whether it's just, you know, I'm concerned about this, like, impacting my business if I get flooded, or, you know, hey, I have some engineering data that I want to share. Whatever that is, the whole, you know, range of input you may have, go ahead and send it to us so that we can include it in future conversations.
Hey, Evelyn, can you go zoom back in again on Franklinton? It's a great example, I think. That's good right there. And then give us the, oh, that's too far, I guess. There we go. And then sweep the social vulnerability map across there. We can see a great deal of great number of flooded structures in an area that's got high SOVI. And consequently, what that means is the folks who are have the least assets and ability to deal with flooding and the aftermath of flooding are some of the people who are getting flooded the most. And so this is going to be a super important tool as you as a regional steering committee start to look through how do we address flooding and where is it critical that we do that, these SOBI data will be extremely important for you.
And I think one thing that's important to keep in mind, y'all, is that it's a requirement of the CDBG funds that they be spent in majority low to moderate income areas. So I think a lot of the people that are on the regional steering committee have been a part of a process where that is one of the priorities. But I think centering that and keeping that in mind is going to be particularly relevant. And I think a lot of the folks that are on the steering committee also recognize that by really centering and focusing in on those low to moderate income populations that are most vulnerable, or communities that have been disenfranchised or divested in over time, that we're actually going to see a larger return on our investments, and that our economies actually become stronger by providing that support too. So I just wanted to flag that people on this call have probably dealt with that at some point in time, and just to provide a reminder that that's a requirement of the CDBG funds.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. I want to make one clarification to what you said. Because we are dealing with watersheds and the water flows throughout the watershed, the wording of the restriction here is that we have to benefit primarily low to moderate income areas. That doesn't mean the project necessarily has to be built or the ordinance passed in a low to moderate income area. It's just got to have benefits of flood risk reduction and natural habitat enhancement. So keep that in mind, because we all know the water is flowing downstream all the time. And so there are things we can do, interventions we can do that may be in a different area that have impacts in another area. Okay. Wait, I think I see a new chat. Interesting comments about development in Ascension Parish. Okay, Evelyn, I think that's where we're going to have to leave it. Is there something else that we needed to cover here before we step away?
I think we're good. We've heard, I just want to put us on the recap screen. We've heard a lot of great input today, and I don't want to spend too much time kind of recapping the entire thing, because we got so much great feedback, right? But I do want to just thank everybody for kind of adding to this conversation and making sure that we're covering a whole range of considerations. And I'm glad that we've heard from, you know, some perspectives around conveyance and natural functions, and that we've talked about our backwater flooding and our sort of complex flood profile in this area. So just want to recount that. And we've gotten some great input on, like, you know, potential solutions that include natural functions or ways to sort of use our floodplain to our benefit to address these issues. And I've also heard, you know, a variety of comments about, well, you know, mitigating using flood insurance, right? And also considering the development practices in our area. So I just want to thank everybody again for giving us that feedback. We will continue to accept input, like I said, going forward, and then we will make sure that we include it in our follow-up conversations as well with the group. So if anyone felt like they wanted to jump in and they didn't get a chance to, I think, you know, the next couple minutes would be good, and then we can move along.
Yep, it's super engaged group. Thank y'all so much. This is the only way we're all going to get there, is for everybody to participate.
Yeah, and thank y'all for bringing this presentation and for working with us on getting some of that comments incorporated. We really appreciate it. I know that there were maybe some folks on the line that we haven't heard from yet, so I just wanted to kind of flag that. You know, if Bridget or Bobby Joe or Ronnie, Major, Ryan, Devin, Steve, Earl, Gary, Karen, if y'all have anything you want to say or to bring up or any questions, like feel free, feel comfortable to do that. And then if you have anything afterwards, if that's maybe the better space, then just please let me know. So I'll pause for a minute, see if anybody has a response.
I see a question.
Yeah, this is, oh, sorry about that.
No, go ahead, Devin.
So I was just going to say a couple things. Yeah, so in terms of using natural solutions, I know St. John, we're very concerned and very focused on preserving as much as we can the Maurepas Swamp. I know below Lake Maurepas, there's going to be the river reintroduction there, but also on the Manchac Land Bridge. That land bridge I know is very crucial for the multiple lines of defense strategy, for storm surge for the entire region. We have a breakwater project right now that's targeting a couple parts of the, I guess, the east side of the land bridge to try to help preserve some of the more erosion-prone areas. And we also are working with the Friends of the Manchac Greenway to kind of enhance their bike path that starts in Ponchatoula and goes to Laplace, but really using it as a way to enhance like the natural area and get people connected to the natural area, and then eventually using it as an educational purpose to really show how the swamps can be not only beautiful but useful for flood risk. And then another thing, I guess, for that social vulnerability index, I could see on that map that, yeah, a couple of those places that it targets as like the most vulnerable in Laplace are very, very true. But there is one of the census tracts or block groups that is orange, and it's like right on the interstate, right below where the interstate I-10 branches off from I-55, I believe. That one is, I would say that one should be more red because that one holds most of our repetitive loss areas. So I just think that keeping that in mind and seeing what kind of variables go into making these vulnerability maps and just updating them as much as we can from people, you know, giving their input, I think that's a good idea.
Just to make sure everybody's clear, this is social vulnerability map that we're looking at right now, and that has to do more with people's incomes, language, the housing they live in, that kind of thing. It's not about flooding, it's about where your most vulnerable people live. And we can overlay that with the flooding, and you can do that whenever you go access this map. You'll be able to do exactly the same thing.
Okay, yeah, that definitely makes sense. And it definitely is reflected in the census information that I've gotten. It would be very interesting to see all these maps, I guess, layered on top of each other. But yeah, thanks for putting this together.
I would like to add that make sure all those projects you just mentioned were in our inventory.
Absolutely, yeah. We're kind of working on putting them all together right now in a time where we can just kind of copy and paste and then fill them out all at once. But yeah, that is definitely our intention.
This is Bridget. I don't know if I've tried to unmute, if you guys can hear me or not.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Gotcha.
Okay, great. I just wanted to share that we actually have some fairly new regulatory oversight regarding wetlands and wetland impact that I absolutely love the idea that we actually have a map that we can look at now and really have more of an idea of what the impact will be. And I love the idea of being able to utilize this and maybe have an overlay with our, our firm, so we can see where they interchange. I try my best to do some education with just the general public and even our elected officials when we're talking about the difference between an actual floodplain and a wetland area. That they actually go hand in hand. You know, they're like cousins, but they're not the same thing, and those terms are so not interchangeable. So I think it's important for us to really use these tools and do a really good job of sharing how one can benefit the other, but they're really not the same animal.
Great point. Thank you.
So I just want to thank everybody with OCD and all the support that put all this together, and understand that they're doing this for each region. So this is a lot of great work that's been pulled together.
Well, thank y'all. It's been a great group to talk to, really. And again, don't forget, this is yours. The work comes from you. The information comes from you. It can only get better if you guys improve it with your local knowledge. So that's really the key takeaway from this is a tool we're putting out there, but it's up to you guys to use it and improve it.
Yeah. Thank you all again so very much. We could talk about this all day, I think, but unfortunately, time does not allow that. And I want to be really respectful of everybody's time. So thank y'all again for presenting this. Thank you to everybody on the Regional Steering Committee and everybody who participated in this conversation. I think it was really robust, and I know that I definitely learned a lot. As y'all know, I constantly tell y'all that I think I'm just learning every single day, like at a whip-neck pace, if you will. So we are going to switch in our agenda to the project survey tools that exist, which I think has been mentioned perhaps a couple of times. Everybody who's on the Regional Steering Committee should have received an email from me that has specific links to this. If you are not on the Regional Steering Committee, don't worry. I have it in the works to actually provide links to all of the information that's about to be presented. And this presentation will be offered as a PDF, so you can click on the links from the slides as well. So we're going to go over the project inventory survey form as well as the project viewer. And so I do want to make a couple of notes here, and we'll discuss this until about 4:10, at which point we'll then switch into public comment and then go to closeout. So I just wanted to do a quick time check there. So please note the state does not have project funds available yet. So they are waiting on the grant agreement from HUD. So essentially anything that has to do with funding for projects is kind of at a stopping place right now. They're hoping that grant agreement is going to be signed very soon. But until then, we can't actually put any money into that project process, if you will. If you have any questions about round one specifically, they might be answered in this FAQs document, which once again, you're all going to get the slides. And so it will be linked in there. This is on the watershed.la.gov website under their assets tab and docs. If you have any specific questions that are not addressed in FAQs, you can actually contact LWI-round1@la.gov to ask any specific questions. The project inventory that I'm about to show y'all is meant to be filled out by October 31st, but it's a living database, so it'll be continued to be updated over time. So whenever Chuck just said, hey, Devin, it would be great if y'all could put those projects in, that's what he was referring to. So what is the purpose of this tool? The purpose is really to have a comprehensive project inventory across the region. So it's including new ideas, including programs, projects that are under construction, and projects that have been constructed in the last 2 years. And I'm also going to say, anybody at OCD, please feel free to jump in. I think they're the experts in this information, so please feel free to jump in at any time. Anybody can submit, so even if it was just me as a resident and I wasn't involved in this process at all and didn't attend the call, I could still submit a project in that form. One really important note is that the submission of a project does not mean that it will be funded. So this is not a formal submission for funding. This is literally an inventory. So if you think about it as a bucket of ideas, if you will, and it's really to get an understanding of the landscape across the region. So we do have all of the project links listed on the CRPC website. So that's at crpcla.org/projects. So you can actually see the project inventory survey for every single region. I'm gonna actually click on region 7 here. Let me see. Okay, great. It is loading. Okay, and Evelyn, if you have any specific things to say here, I think that could be really helpful. I know some people have been really bringing some issues and submitting things to me. So if you have issues in submitting anything, please let me know, send me an email. But Evelyn, do you have anything specific to say about the project form?
Sure. Thanks, Rachel. I mean, I think the questions that we've been getting most frequently, that's what kind of I would want to pull out for everyone. The form itself is pretty self-explanatory, but we have had some questions about, well, can I put in like a conceptual project or a project that was already built or a project that is in the planning phase but like isn't designed yet? And so as you scroll through this form, you'll see that there is an option to indicate what stage of planning the project is at. So the answer to all of those questions is yes. If you think you might want to include it, you should go ahead and include it, right? Because this is a planning tool for this group. And so, you know, anything that you think is relevant to your conversation about how to plan for the region together, you want to go ahead and enter it. And so you have options for different stages of projects. And then if you have questions on like how to categorize a project, again, there's some directions in this form that may help you kind of figure that out. But also, you know, Rachel and our staff can assist if you have a question about, well, I'm not sure out of these two categories, like which one it fits into. And then, you know, one thing that I've heard questions on is, you know, if I have kind of like a suite of projects that fits together as one unified project, if it's improvements to like multiple parts of a channel, or say it's like, you know, a buyout or elevation project where you have a lot of properties, but it's like one unified approach. I would say try and group those into one if you think that that is most helpful in the planning effort, because that may make it a little bit easier for this group to discuss. But yeah, those are the things that occur to me. If you're having like technical issues, again, please let us know. Reach out to Rachel or LWI staff. Risa and myself are always available for that kind of thing, and we'll troubleshoot with you.
Great. Thank you so much, Evelyn. And I know that some folks have already been very appreciative of y'all's efforts in trying to troubleshoot some challenges that have come up. Does anybody have any specific questions about the project inventory survey form? I'll also try to pull up the chat box here if it'll let me. Go. And one question from Ross in the chat box. When do you think the agreement will be signed? Alex Carter said soon, we hope. I know that the folks over at OCD are doing the very best that they can to ensure that that's signed as soon as possible. I think that's one of the things that, you know, it's just kind of out of their control. It's just waiting on HUD to get it done, and we hope that's soon.
And we would, this is Risa, and we would encourage everyone to double check their portion of the inventory list and the visuals especially, to make sure that all of those projects that have been pre-approved for a full application are showing up. And if you notice that some are not, please let Rachel know.
Yeah, that's a really great reminder, Risa. We've already had a couple of people who have said, hey, this project that we submitted isn't in here. It should include, on the project viewer, it should include everything that is submitted from this project inventory survey form, as well as the round one pre-applications. And Bridget says on their inventory list, I'm going to follow up with you, Bridget. I see that you might have some projects missing, so I'm going to actually make a note there. Okay, we're going to switch into the viewer, which has been brought up just a little bit. Here we go. All right, so the viewer is slightly different. I mean, it is different from the tool, not slightly. This tool actually shows all of the projects and their details that were submitted either in that project survey tool or as applications for round one. It actually shows both of those things. So like Bridget had just said, there are projects that are not showing up for Tangipahoa that should be. If you have information like that, please let me know. If you are curious about the list of eligible pre-applications that were submitted, you can go to this link here, watershed.la.gov, eligible-pre.applications-projects, and you'll be able to see that. Once again, there's a specific one for every single region. So if you visit CRPC's website at crpcla.org/projects, you can see all of the links. I'm going to go ahead and click into this, and we'll just see what it looks like. Here we go, it's loaded. So once again, the disclaimer, this is not, it's not an indication that funding's provided if it's on this list. It's just the inventory itself. Evelyn or Risa, do y'all have any particular things that are helpful for us to know about this specific tool?
I mean, I would just add that, you know, it's for this group. And so I think the most important thing about your contribution to the inventory isn't like what you show the state as much as it's what you show to each other, right? And so how you can discuss like combining efforts between two parishes or multiple jurisdictions to try to address the risk that we're all trying to like plan for, you know? And so that would just be my 2 cents on it. Risa, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, you've got it accurately. The other item that we've seen that's caused some concerns, I think, when people are looking at the map is when you look at it, you see some dots like out in the middle of the lake, for instance, right? And that's tied to the way that the longitude and latitude were entered, et cetera. So as you see anything, please do not only be checking that they're there, but that they're in the right place so that we can update accordingly with tighter information as we receive it.
Yeah, that's great to know. Thank you, Risa. And I see we have a comment from Honora that says that as well. So I think if we can get in contact with those folks and make sure that we are fixing the lat long, if you will, then that's going to be really helpful. So Honora, if you know those folks, please send them my way. If not, I'm definitely going to write a note to double check that anyways, because the more accurate the information is, the more useful it's going to be for us. Okay. Do we have any questions about either of those tools from anybody? Okay. I'm not hearing anything. Also, both of those things can be shared with anybody. They're not closed products or anything, so please feel free to share those with anybody who is curious. So I guess we can enter into public comment period. We're actually a minute early, which is great. So if there's anybody who has a public comment, you can feel free to put that in the chat box at this time, or you can unmute yourself and if you feel free to say that verbally. I'm going to wait just a couple of minutes because.
Yes, if anybody happens to be speaking right now, you are on mute. So *6 if you're on a phone, by the way.
Also give people, if they're typing it in, maybe a couple of minutes to type it in.
Can I go ahead and speak, Rachel?
Go ahead, Marie.
Okay. I'm working on some really exciting things. Some of us volunteers, we've picked up 346 bags of litter off the banks of Capitol Lakes from the storm system. We figured that calculated 16 55-gallon barrels a month are flowing in. And I found out that over at the Burden wetland, they have 70 to 100 tons sitting in the wetland because of the overflow of Ward Creek. So I went to Pensacola, Florida, and met with Roger Williams, a stormwater facilities manager, and he shared with me some of his program and told me about these hydro separators, the Vortex and the Cascade machine in particular. And what they do is the water, it's a passive machine, the water goes in and then it gets spun by this, by the design of the machine. It's sort of like a washing machine. The bad stuff, the sediments down to 50 microns, which is about a hair in your head, the pollutants and the debris that lowers the oxygen levels and those types of things. They all go to the bottom. And then when the storm is done, things are kind of calmed down. At some point, it could even be once a year, twice a year, depending on how much stuff flows through. A vacuum truck comes in and sucks it out. And they get their funding source from a stormwater utility fee. So right now, I've been talking to some people in the state in the Division of Administration, and then some other folks about the concept of the stormwater utility fee. And I've also been sampling the public to see what they feel. And people are really tired of the litter, and they like the idea that we can solve a lot of these problems with, one piece of equipment, or they actually have a whole lineup, but, one piece of equipment can do so much. And I love what Dietmar was saying, and it made me think about Capitol Lakes, the Burden, and Bluebonnet, because they're so important as retention areas, and all of them are filling up with sediments. But if we have these machines in place, we would be able to intercept this stuff before it gets in. So it would be tremendously expensive to do this. You can't expect the Public Works Department to suddenly come up with the millions it would take to buy these things and the crew it would take to service them. And so I am trying to push the notion of this stormwater utility fee that hundreds of communities have. In fact, Florida has so many that they actually have a stormwater association over there. And I talked to some of those people, and they told me, for example, they gave me a list of what towns and cities pay. Pensacola pays $5.80 a month for their fee. They have kind of a complex way of assessing that fee. But when I've been talking to local people, because we're in a pandemic and a recession or depression, depending on whether you have a job, I said it would be great if we could do an opt-out. People love the idea of an opt-out. You would be automatically opted in, but if you feel like you have financial issues or whatever, you could opt out. That's my idea.
Thanks, Marie. I think that's a big idea. I think it's a really interesting one and a good one, and to hear from our other folks in Florida who have similar and dissimilar challenges, how they've been handling that over time. Thank you. And I want to acknowledge that Honora Buris had said in the chat during the public comment period, I would like to see an effort to identify key lands that should be targeted for conservation, either by easement or fee title acquisition. Thank you, Honora. Is there anybody else? We have about 6 minutes left for the public comment period. So if you're speaking, you are unmuted.
Yeah, I wanted to share something right quick.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Sure can.
I'm not sure who was talking regarding the trash machines, but something that we've been, or actually one of our citizens that's helping us out in restoration project was able to run a small project with a device that intercepts the trash and holds it, and it allows for analysis of the trash to tell where it's coming from. And I thought that is a relatively low cost way of addressing the issue. And because trash is important in that it clogs up waterways and reduces flood capacity, and then sediment builds up behind that trash. But they're able to analyze the trash and tell where it's coming from. And sometimes it may be a simple solution. For example, they noticed that the majority of the trash was the cups coming from a local movie theater. So we may be able to go to that movie theater and see if there's a way that they could relocate the trash bin such that it doesn't overflow or fall out into the waterways or the drainage canals.
Thank you, Chuck. I think that's a really complimentary discussion, and maybe I should connect y'all in the background. So I'll send a follow-up email. It sounds like y'all have a lot to discuss and a lot in common. Is there anybody else? We have about 4 minutes left in the public comment section. I know we've had some comments from some people on the line. I think maybe Jacqueline Ward and Matthew Allen are a couple of people who have said quite a few things in the chat box. Okay, if you're speaking, you're on mute. I'm not seeing any more comments coming in the chat box. I'm not hearing anybody. So I think maybe Ross and Chuck are chair and co-chair. Would y'all like to move forward? Oh, Jacqueline Moore, she said that she can't talk. She wasn't sure how this worked and her speaker is off. That is okay, Jackie. I can follow up with you after this and make sure that we, so the next time we have this, you know how to unmute yourself. If you are on your phone, then you can unmute yourself that way and then press *6. If you are on your phone through the Zoom app, or if you are on your computer or some other device similar to a computer like an iPad, then your unmute button should be in the lower left-hand corner.
Okay, Rachel?
Yes,
Hello?
we can hear you. Is this Jacqueline?
Yes, ma'am. It's like one of the things that we have a problem with is like my neighborhood. I live in the heart of Gonzales. We have people here that have lived here 40, 50 years, never flooded. And I understand that, you know, you have, I can't think of the word I want to use, the erosion of waterways. We understand that. But these houses, we stay dry. And there's a piece of land across, you know, in the center here in our neighborhood. And for years we were told, oh, it's never going to be developed. It's a flood area. It's a retention place for when we get heavy rain. And as long as I was there, we didn't flood. We didn't have ponding. We, you know, we have the side street drainage problem, but everybody has that in Gonzales. But now that they built these 30 houses, houses are flooding, streets are flooding like we never did before. And this land, like, you know, I had posted, it's like 3 to 4 feet below street level. Well, now it's 3 to 4 feet above street level. They put 3 ponds in there and they go, oh, you can relax now. You're not going to flood because the ponds are going to relieve the problem. Well, if a glass is full, how much more water can you add to a full pond? You know, and it's like, who's going to maintain these ponds? Because they're in a subdivision. So the city's not responsible to make sure they don't get clogged up. And you know the people in the subdivision isn't going to do it. So then in a couple of years, when these pipes that's supposed to let the water drain out slowly, when it gets to that level, gets clogged up with debris or whatever from the air, we're going to be in worse shape because nobody's going to accept responsibility. And it's like, when y'all are doing these maps, does anybody put these things into consideration? You know, on my block alone, you know, I live in a multi-nationality income neighborhood. Some people are retired. Some people are just getting started. You know, we have black, white, Spanish. We have it all. We're a nice mixed neighborhood. But it's like you come riding down our street and there's every house just about is a different height. We have trailers, we have houses, and they're all different heights. And when all these, it's like with the subdivision now, we have a house down the road from me. The house they built next to couldn't have been more than 10 years old. They built a new house next to it about 3 years ago. The foundation comes to the middle of their window. This is the kind of development that's going on. And what we're hearing is that's FEMA. FEMA wants the elevation. Well, that's fine and dandy. Compensate with drainage. But the drainage is not being compensated. They're building, it's nobody, like fireworks going off for New Year's. They're building around here. And nothing's being done to bring drainage up to par. They're taking away our sponges, and they're not doing anything with the drainage.
Yeah, and I really appreciate what you're saying, Jackie, and I think Jacqueline. I'm sorry, not Jackie.
Jackie's good.
Jackie's good. Okay, I did not want to call you by nickname if that was improper. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And I think, I've heard that from quite a few folks, and I think that folks that are in, I've heard specific instances of that in Tangipahoa, and I think there are a lot of other places where that's happening too. So thank you for bringing your Gonzalez wisdom, your lived experience, expertise. I think that's a really great point.
And it's like we hear, it's like we've got all these pumps, and our parish president now, he's trying to do preventative maintenance. It's like, okay, bad weather's coming in, we're going to drain the swamp, and we will be ready to pump in the water. The only problem is when you got culverts in the street that are halfway underground or better, the pumps can't pump it out. It's impossible. Or the culverts are too high or a foot higher than the ground kind of thing. They've got to be leveled out, and they got to be cleaned out, blown out, whatever it takes.
Yeah, and Jackie, I think I don't want to, I'm going to cut you off with love here, and I'm going to suggest that I send you an email, and you and I can set up some time to talk, because I really want to hear more about what you're saying. Is that okay?
Sure, that'll be fine.
Okay, we're short on time. I apologize. I know we could talk about this. All right, thank you. And then
you're welcome.
I wanted to acknowledge that Matthew Allen also said would like to see tax credits for landowners preserving floodplains or at a minimum river valleys. So thank you, Matt. We are going to transition out of that public comment period. This is, it's for everybody's awareness, but in particular our regional steering committee members. Please note that we will have upcoming meetings happening. I think we all know this. So mid-August, we're going to have an optional, it is optional for the regional steering committee members, Values, Vision, and Goals workshop. That's going to be public. It will be a virtual public meeting. More details will come very soon. Our August 26th meeting that is already scheduled, we will have LSU, so Dr. Thomas Dusitz, as well as some of his students that have been doing some work, will provide some support for a Governance 101 discussion. That will go hand in hand with a deliverable from CSRS, which is one of OCD's contractors, on a root cause analysis workshop. So identifying some of the reasons why people think that flooding is happening in Region 7. September, we will have a discussion on the governance gap analysis. So CSRS has a subcontractor who is working to identify all of the entities within the region that have some degree of responsibility or management that is related to water. And then in October, we're going to have LSU really focus in on an existing conditions overview. So they've been looking at subdivision regulations and ordinances, and they're trying to map out kind of what are similarities and differences. So we will have a larger, as well as doing that for parish plans, so comprehensive as well as hazard mitigation plans. So we will have an overview. We won't necessarily have results, but we will have an overview of what that work is. And then we're also going to be building out our governance recommendation. So I say all of that to say, I'm going to drop this SurveyMonkey link. This link is only for our regional steering committee members. I'm going to drop it into our chat box is the word. I'm going to drop it into the chat box for just our regional steering committee members. This is for you to identify dates that are good for you to meet in September and October, as well as that optional meeting that is going to take place. So please fill that out as soon as you have an opportunity to do so. I'm going to pull our presentation back up. There we go. Okay. So Ross and Chuck, I'm going to turn it over to y'all to guide us through the adoption of our May and June meeting minutes, which were attached to today's event invitation.
Yeah, I'd like to ask if anyone has any changes to the minutes. Any edits or corrections? Hearing none, can I get a motion to adopt the minutes?
This is Earl. You got it.
Is Ryan, I'll second.
Thank y'all. That was very quick. So I had first from Earl and then a second by Ron. Thank you for carrying that you're setting the motion forward, Ross. So I had a request, I think it was from Earl, to send the SurveyMonkey via email. I will be following up with that specifically. Our next meeting is August 26th from 1 to 4 p.m. This is different than the optional meeting that's mentioned above. The August optional meeting is for setting a vision, values, and goals. Specifically, that's going to be creating kind of some ideas from everybody in the region. We will bring that forward to the Regional Steering Committee. It will likely be in the form of maybe a guiding principles document or something of that nature. So Regional Steering Committee members, do not worry. If you cannot be present at that August meeting, we will certainly get your input later on when that document has been developed and created. So please, once again, fill out the SurveyMonkey. I'm going to send that via email along with the meeting minutes. And I will make sure that the adoption of the May and June meeting minutes is accounted for and that those are uploaded to the website. Ross and Chuck, is there anything else that we're forgetting or that we need to do?
I'll defer to Chuck if he has anything.
I can think of.
We're good?
I'm good.
A motion to adjourn?
Thank everybody for participating.
Absolutely. It was great meeting. So I definitely want to thank Rachel and her group again, and Evelyn and everyone at CRPC and OCD. So yeah, just another great meeting.
And thank y'all. Thank y'all for your participation.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, you do need a motion to adjourn. Did y'all
Make a
wanna go
motion.
ahead and-
I think I heard a motion to adjourn from Ross. Does anybody have a first?
No, I was asking for a motion to adjourn.
This is Bruce. I'll second it.
Great, thank you. Well, I think I heard that second there. So thank y'all very much for participating. Like I said, y'all we're doing this in the midst of a lot of different things happening in our lives right now that are probably a little stressful. So thank y'all for spending your time with us today. I know it was 2.5 hours. So please know that your time is valuable and that we value it greatly. And you could have been anywhere else, but you chose to be with us today. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. If you ever need anything, please feel free to reach out.
Thanks, everybody. This is Earl. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank y'all. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.